Hello, welcome to Zigmatech Learning Hub. I will be your instructor for fine art. You can call it visual art as well, cultural and creative art. Now for this class, we are going to be taking our exercises from the ExamGuide app. Now if you don't have this application installed already in your device, I will advise you download this app in order for you to follow along this class. Now, ExamGuide is a leading educational app that helps students prepare adequately for exams, for various exams, such as UTME, post-UTME, WAEC, GCE, KCPE, IJMB, JUPEB, Calbepedia, BECE, JSCE, NCEE, NECO, to mention but a few. You can download the app from our website www.examguide.com, or you can download it as well as using your Google Play Store. Please subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell to be updated on new videos as we upload. Now, if you're ready for today's class, okay, let's get started.
Okay, now welcome back to Cultural and Creative Arts. And tie and dye will be what we'll be discussing today, but this class is the part 2 of the tie and dye class. All right, now previously we talked about a lot in the previous class, so this other class we are going to discuss even more, so that will help you gain a full knowledge of what tie and dye is. All right, now I want us now to see some of the things you're going to gain in the course of the study as you go through. Now our objective for this study, number 1, now by the end of this class you'll be able to describe the meaning of tie and dye like we explained before. Now you'll be able to explain the branches where tie and dye belongs to, and then finally one of the major things I want you to pick up from this class is that you will be able to produce your own tie and dye fabric. That is the key point I want you to get out from this class, because this class is a practical class kinda. So it's a class where we'll explain bit by bit on how you can actually dye a fabric. All right, so without any further ado, let's get started. On my screen you will see the synthetic dye. Now this is a kind of dye that comes in powdered form. As we proceed, I'm going to explain in detail what exactly is synthetic dye, how we can use the synthetic dye, and what impact does it actually have in tie and dye process. See how beautiful it comes out, it looks. All right, so types of dye. Now let's look at what the types of dye. Now there are very many kinds of dye that can be used to dye or to dye a particular cloth, depending on the manufacturer and the type at which you choose for dyeing your cloth. Basically, there are two major types of dye, and it comes in 2 forms. Now it is either a cold water dye or a hot water dye. Now remember before now in our previous class I told you that you would need a heat source as a material for dyeing. Now that depends on the kind of dye you're using. So if you're using a cold water dye, then you don't really need any heat source as a material. So but to be on the safe side, if they ask you to list the materials that are needed for tie and dye, you are so free to write what the heat source, because that gives you a liberty of what choice. So now, like I told you, we have 2 major types of dye, which is basically it comes in 2 forms. It could be the cold water dye or what the hot water dye, and they are either in powdered form or in liquid form. Now that brings us back to the synthetic dye I showed you before. Now if you watch, the synthetic dye comes in powdered form as against the ink or the natural dye that comes in in liquid form. Now I'm going to tell you the different types of dye, their names, and then you see how some of them look like in the course of the study. Now the quality differs according to the method and the manufacturer brand. Now the quality of each of these dye, they differ according to the method it's been made and the manufacturer brand. Now I will still reference, or I will still say this over and over again. No matter what you do, no matter how much you choose, no matter what you're going for, I will still tell you that the organic dye comes out, for me, better. The organic dye comes out better compared to these chemicals that we have that you use today, tomorrow is going off. I saw a guy wearing a tie and dye shirt and walking under the rain. Both him and the rain were just coloring like what he was wearing. So all those are because of the bad quality of dye. So I will advise, before you buy any dye, or if you want to practice this, make sure you're getting the dye from the right source. You don't go and use a dye that will wash off together with you as it's graining. But anyway, for learning purposes, you can actually lay your hands on any dye and then you work with it. Still awesome. You get. All right, now so let's continue. All right, so we have different types of dye. Now the first dye we have there is what? The VAT dye. Under the VAT dye, we have the pigment dye, and what we have the basic dye. We also have the mordant dye. Now all these are the first 4 dye we have. Then we come down to synthetic dye. We have the synthetic dye, we have the reactive dye, and we have the developed dyes. Now these are different types of dye. Also, we also have the sulfur dye, we have the aniline dye, we have the azo dye, and then we have the natural dye. So, which I call the natural dye the organic dye. So all these, I can't go further to start explaining each and every one of them. Just know that they are what the different types of dye. So if you're going to buy a dye, depends on what you want to dye and the kind of fabric you want to dye, or what you really want to achieve in your dyeing process. Now, some of these dye that you've seen here, some of them are hot water dye, while some of them are what? Cold water dye. Some of them comes in liquid form, while some comes in what? Powdered form. The synthetic dye, some of them comes in liquid form, and some synthetic dye comes in what? In water form, depending on what the manufacturer wants to put out in the market. Just like we have the powdered milk, and then we have the what? The liquid milk. For example, the peak milk. Inside peak milk, we have the powdered peak milk, which we call the cowbell, and we also have the peak milk, which is the what? The liquid peak milk. So the same thing applies to your dye. So just have that at the back of your mind, that we have 2 major types of dye, the hot water dye and the cold water dye, that either comes in powdered form or what? Liquid form. Now the brands differ. We have the synthetic dye, we have the sulfur dye, we have the aniline dye, we have the azo dye, we have the natural dye, we have the pigment dye, we have the VAT dye, and then the basic dye. All these are different types of dye that you can lay your hands on and then work. I don't have to prescribe anyone for you. Anyone you choose will deliver the job well. So you just make sure you're working with the original material, and don't forget, always use glove. Safety first. Safety first. Put that at the back of your mind when doing that. Now let's look at the procedure for dyeing. I'll try as much as possible to be very fast with this class so that you can actually go and then get this material and then give your hand a trial with that. Now the procedure for dyeing. All right. Dyeing processes. Number 1, the fabric to be dyed must be clean. The fabric to be dyed must be what? Clean. Make sure all season is removed by washing vigorously with soap and hot water. Remember, initially I told you that you need to put your clothes in a hot water overnight. Now after soaking it overnight, the following time you now wash it off to remove the incising in them. So that's one of the purposes. You first prepare the clothes for dyeing by washing. After washing, there is the next step which we look at. Now, these are the materials that are needed for the dyeing. You know, the preparation, you get your fabric, you soak it in hot water, you know, you bring your dye stuff, you bring your glove, you bring your raffia, you bring your dye, you bring your boil, you bring your wood or your spatula to stir, to mention but a few. Now, these are the things that will be needed for the dyeing process. Now, the number 2 preparation in your dye process is you plan your design. You plan your design by first trying different combination of dyeing method. But I will advise you practice this using a scrap cloth. Using what? A scrap cloth and practicing, so that you don't end up destroying your original fabric. So you plan your design first with a scrap cloth before going into the real thing. All right, now this is the planning process. You know, let's just believe that he or she has actually tried the design on something else, and now he's venturing it into the finished work of the clothes. All right, now number 3 is mix the dye as indicated by the manufacturer. Now there are some dye that comes raw, so but you see the prescription on how to mix those dyes, you know, on the manufacturer's what? Prescription book. So you follow the prescription and mix the dye. Some dye will accept 2 full teaspoons of hydrosulfite and a teaspoon of caustic soda, depending on the manufacturer. So they will tell you what and how to mix the dye, and then you follow their prescription to mix your dye. Don't go and mix a dye outside the manufacturer's prescription. You might spoil the dye or damage yourself. All right. So now this is just an image of one trying to, try his hands in different method and different concepts, of tying processes. See how beautiful it looks and how interesting these things comes out to be. Okay, now number 4 method of dyeing is what you dip the material in warm water before dyeing. Now this will tighten the tied strings and also what conform to the dyeing instruction. Now squeeze out the excess water before you start applying your dye. Now when you get this material, you soak it in hot water after tying. Let's say you're using the concentric circle, and after tying we are advised to soak it in warm water. That warm water will help congeal to fasten it tighter on the fabric, so that by the time you start dyeing, it will help retain or resist the dye properly from penetrating into the other places you don't really want to be dyed. So always put at the back of your mind that you must squeeze out the excess water and then leave it to cushion before you start applying your dye. Okay, now let's see this. When they have absorbed the material into the hot water, they have squeezed it out, and they're getting it prepared for the dyeing process. All right, now after doing that, you place and dip the clothes in the dye solution, and then stir constantly with your stick or your hand. Remember to use a hand glove. Don't just use your bare hands, to stir. You stir properly with your stick so that the material will be what? Dyed evenly. Because there are sometimes, if you don't stir or if you don't turn the material properly, there are some places that you want it to be dyed that the dye might not get to. But if you stir it and then turn it properly, you'll get the dye to every place you want the dye to reach. I don't know if I'm communicating. All right. So now let's go over to the 6th step. Now, this is the perfect example of the man in his dye pit. And now you see the wood he's holding, he's using it to press the dye into the dye pit so that the clothes will be well absorbed with the dye. And sometimes they keep these things there and keep it overnight. If you watch, you see the cover of each of the pits by the side, and that stuff that is hanged on top of him, this very stuff that is hanged on top of him, yes, this I'm pointing now, yes, is the cover of the pit. So that's where they cover the pit, soak their clothes, press it in there, leave it there, cover it maybe overnight, and then they later bring it out and untie to get the desired design they're looking for. Even what he's wearing is his product. So that's a perfect, example of what I'm trying to explain. All right, now number 6, just like I said initially, that you leave the material in the dye for a few hours or as you desire, maybe longer, but not unnecessarily longer, so that the dye will not penetrate into the tied places. So there is a way you can just leave the dye. It becomes, unless depending on the what you're trying to make anyway. If it is batik does not really care. You can keep batik there for 2 days, 3 days. It still comes out very sound because it works with wax. But if it is a tying method, the more it stays, the dye will gradually penetrate through those places that are tied, and then eventually you will just have a blank material without any dye, without any pattern on it. So we'll advise you keep it long, but not too long, not unnecessarily longer than needed, you understand, to avoid damaging the fabric you intended making. Okay, haven't said this. All right, so now this is a material that is actually, that have absorbed the dye, and then they've removed it from the dye solution and then put it in a plastic bag, to keep it to settle, to allow the dye or to allow the fabric absorb the dye properly before it is being untied. Mind you, it is not in the dye. It has been taken out of the dye and placed in a fabric to keep it. So don't mistake, keeping the dye too long keeping the fabric in the dye too long and removing the fabric in the dye and putting it in the in a polythene bag and allowing it to stay so that the dye will actually, penetrate properly into the needed or the desired spaces you want it to. So that's just the perfect example of what I'm trying to explain previously. Now, after doing that, you remove from the dye and rinse in cold water. So when you're done, you can now remove the clothes from the dye, and then you now rinse it with cold water. You may store the dye, the remaining dye, in a cool place for future use. Now, one thing you should know is we In art, we don't believe in waste. Everything is so useful. Even the dye that you've used to dye a particular cloth, you can actually use it to form a very beautiful painting, on a canvas. So we don't advise you throw away or you trash your dye after using it. No, it can save you, it can serve for something else. So after using the dye, you cover it and then keep it in a safe place for future use. That is other ways in which you can actually conserve or retain some of those materials to avoid unnecessary waste. So having said this, now let's go over to looking at this very work. Now this is a finished work of art. A finished work of art. Now they are done with this. Now they're just keeping it to cushion some of the water and then, absorb the dye. All right. Now if you're using more than 2 colors, now you're advised to start with the lightest color. And whenever you're making any dye production, you must start with what? The light color. For example, you're working with 3 colors. Now you have red, you have yellow, and then you have purple. Automatically, you should know that your yellow is the brightest color there, followed by your red, before the purple. Now the purple is the darkest color. So therefore, you have to start with the yellow first. You dye the yellow. So even if the yellow stained the part of the red or the part of the purple, there is no cause for alarm. As against starting with the purple and the purple entering into the yellow, it will actually damage, it will give you a different design altogether. Not that it will damage the work, but it will give you what you never anticipated for. Sometimes it comes out very nice, but to save yourself that stress, we'll advise you start with the lightest color. After applying the light color, you now go over to what? Using the second stronger before the strongest color. So let me just read what I have here. If another color is to be used, untie the strings desired and retie at another post or spot rather, and then put the next color dye solution. Start with the lightest color like I told you initially and end with the darkest color. Example, if you're dyeing yellow, yellow should come first before blue, before orange, before purple, and so on and so forth. So that is that for that. Now this is exactly what I was just trying to explain. If you watch, they started with yellow, dyed the yellow, and then they applied red. After dyeing the red, if you watch, some part of the yellow touched this part, that doesn't really count. The color of the work will still come out very nice. So you dye the yellow, you dye the red, and then before you dye what? The purple or the blue to get your perfect job. So having done that, you allow it to drip off excess water, or you can actually squeeze out the excess water and then you keep it to dry, and voila, you have your dyed work. So for those of you that would want to practice this, or that would in turn want to be, a clothes manufacturer or a fabric designer or whatsoever, now this is a beautiful video. I will advise you go over it over and over again. You can actually go online and then see some other ways you can actually produce this. I will encourage you to, it is lucrative if you can, and then you think you have the passion and you have the desire for it, come on, it's an open market. You go there, try your hands and produce your own thing, so that is that. You allow the cloth to dry and then boom, it's ready for use. So these are some examples of the finished product of what? Tie and dye fabric. You see how beautiful they come out, they are looking at. So I've seen a lot of teenagers, flexing this kind of design. Yeah. So after allowing it to dry, the last thing you want to do is to what? You press the clothes with hot iron. When the cloth is still damp, not properly dried, when the cloth is still damp, you press with what? Hot iron. So that will now give the cloth the real, thickness or the brightness it's really desired. Because most times if you allow the cloth to dry by the sun, there's nothing is still wrong with that. But most times while we prefer when the cloth is damp and then you iron, it comes out, the clothes will gain a lot of strength and comes out very strong and neat. So that is one of the prescriptions we'll just have to prescribe. So thank you so very much for sitting back with us throughout this class. And I want to believe you grab a whole lot from this, and then you can actually start creating your own tie and dye, right? Okay, if that be the case. So now let's do a quick rundown of what we've learned so far from the first class. We talked about the definition of dye, what exactly dye is. Now we explain the branches at which tie and dye belongs to. And that I told you that tie and dye belongs to textile design. And I remember I also explained the definition of tie and dye, that is the changing of the color of a fabric with the resist method, either batik or by tying the fabric and then dipping it into a dye solution, which at the end, when the fabric is untied, now there are patterns of beautiful designs or color on the fabric. We went further to state how to prepare the clothes before dyeing. How to prepare the clothes before dyeing. Remember I told you, you dip the clothes in hot water, you preferably overnight, so that the seasons will go out of the clothes, as in the wax, the unwanted wax will go out of the clothes, so as to help it absorb proper dye. We went further to explain the different tying method in previous classes, which I told you we have about 7 different tying methods. We have the knotting method, we have the plaiting method, we have the stitching method rather, we have the concentric circle, I have the square circle, to mention but a few. All these were the things we discussed in the previous class. And then we went further to explain the uses of dye. And the uses of dye can never be overemphasized. Remember, if I should ask you, what do the Yoruba people call dye, tie and dye? Don't forget to tell them it is called the adire. It's called adire. So the adire is the name given to tie and dye by the Yorubas. Now, having said this, this is how far we can take, and this marks the end of this topic, tie and dye. So, having done all this, let's try our hands in some questions. Let me see if you really grab exactly what we've just learned so far. All right. Now, number 1 question is explain the word tie and dye. Explain tie and dye. Now, what is tie and dye? I just defined that now. The changing of the color of a fabric with the resist method by tying it and dipping it in a dye solution, and when the cloth is untied, patterns of different designs and color will be created on the fabric. But the main aim of tie and dye is to create pattern and designs on fabrics. All right. Now the number 2 question I want you to try your hands on is state 3 importance of tie and dye. What are the 3 importance of tie and dye? Why do we dye clothes? What do you think? Yes? To create variety? For uniform? So it helps create a shabby? For money? It's like serves as a business venture. Yes. To explore, to create international relationship. Yes, to mention but a few. You can go on and on and on and on and on. All these are the importance of what tie and dye. There are no limits. There are no limits for tie and dye. All right, thank you so very much if you've stayed with us till now. And this is the end of tie and dye class. But before we go, let's try our hands on ExamGuide. Voila. All right, so when the magic word of the ExamGuide. So like you're familiar with this word, and today we are just going to pick the random. Remember what we did is cultural and creative arts. You highlight, you check it, and then you select the topic you want, which is tie and dye is checked, clicked, and then you say okay, and then you go straight, get started. And then let's try question number 5. Which of the following is not required in tie and dye process? Which of the following is not required in tie and dye process? Number 1, dye stuff. Number 2, needle. Number 3, pebbles. Number 4, twine. And number 5, was. The answer is so clear. What is was? So was is the answer, because you need a dye stuff, you need a needle, you need pebble, you need twine. What you don't need is what? Was. So was is the answer. All right. Well, I think what they want to write there is wax. Yes, what they want to write there is wax. So if they write wax, wax still is the answer, because you don't need wax when you're tying and dyeing, unless you want to produce batik. Get that? So if you're producing batik, you see that, then you cannot choose wax. They will have to add something else. So which of the following tool is used to apply wax on a fabric? All right. Which of the following tools? Now, we did not treat this because we are going to treat that in our batik class, but I have to bring it up. So in case, so you meet it in your exams, you just take it as a walkover. Now, one of the tools now that is used in applying those wax, because most times the wax is usually hot, to apply the wax on a fabric is known as what? The tinjantan. The tinjantan is a Chinese word for a tool that is used to absorb, it's foam in nature, that is used to absorb dye and wax, so you can use it now to draw on your fabric. So the answer for this question is E, the tangent side. Then finally, let's try the final question in this section before we'll call it day. Now the fabric in tie and dye design is tied in order to stop dash from penetrating. The fabric in tie and dye design is tied in order to stop dash from penetrating. A, air. B, dye. C, salt. D, water. And E, wow. That, I guess again, that should be wax again. All right. So what do you think? Why do we tie? To allow to stop the dye from penetrating. So the answer is B. So B is our answer. So whenever you see such questions, just bank up straight, boom, B.
Thank you for participating in today's class. You can practice more questions using the exam guide. Now the app scores and give a detailed explanation of all the questions at the end of your practice test. Now you can learn a particular topic of interest with different modes like study mode, mock mode, and practice mode. It also have other features that make learning fun. Now it is a must-have for all serious students. Download the app from www.examguide.com if you don't have it yet. See you in the next class. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell, and then share this video to anyone you know that would benefit from it. Thank you and bye-bye.